And then you go look yourself in the mirror and you say that thing to you. Because as a parent, you would not look at your child ever at any age and wish for them to shame themselves or hate themselves. And so it's, what would you say to your best friend if you don't have kids, or what would you say to your child if they were in this situation as an adult one day? And then show yourself the same grace and the same kindness.
Hey everybody, so that was just a little tidbit from today's episode with Dr. Lisa and Brianna Elizabeth. I want to let you know the title sponsor for today's episode is once again the Yatra Trauma Center here in Krabi, Thailand, where I reside. For those of you that don't know, I'm in Thailand because I started my journey with a 30-day stay at the Yatra Treatment Center, and I have to say it is one of the most transformative experiences I've ever had. They practice IFS therapy, EMDR therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. They've introduced me to Tai Chi, yoga, mindfulness, ice baths, meditation. The list goes on and on and on. And they're just an absolutely amazing facility. So if you have trauma in your life that you think might be holding you back, I highly suggest you check them out as a possible option. And you might just be surprised at the cost relative to paid treatments in North America. So check them out, guys. That's the Yatra Center, and their website is the YATRACENTRE.com. And here's your show. Hello, everybody. Watchers, listeners, supporters of all kinds. Welcome to another episode of the Weekend Ramble on the Ashes to Awesome podcast. I'm your host, Chuck LaFlange, just checking in from Krabi, Thailand. Halfway around the world in Calgary, Alberta is my lovely co-host, Dr. Lisa. How are you doing today, Lisa?
I'm fantastic. I put my daughter to bed last night at about 7:30 or 8 o'clock, and then I woke up at 8 o'clock this morning.
Oh,
so
wow.
It was fantastic.
Solid 12 hours there.
Right? Like, I normally sleep like 5 or 6 hours a night. So every now and then I think my body gets fed up with me and does something like this, but feel good.
Wow.
Had a very long, wonderful sleep.
Did it secretly take you 6 hours to get her to go to bed, though? Is it like, did you actually get 6 hours of sleep in all of this? Is that what happened? I've been in your house. I know how that goes.
Nope.
Right?
No, there are times when this happens, right?
Well,
but when this happens, I usually fall asleep before her.
Yeah.
Right? Or so I've been told. So no, like, I don't know what she did, but I was asleep.
Man, that's what matters, right? Yeah, absolutely, right, absolutely. My guest, our guest this week is Brianna Elizabeth, who is a co-host on the Blaklist podcast with my good friend Jared, and they are in New York, somewhere western New York State, I do believe. Right? How are you doing today, Brianna?
I'm good. You didn't really interrupt much when you called me. So I had nothing going on, so I'm grateful to be here.
Good stuff. We're glad that you agreed to come on short notice. Of course, it's something that we've been wanting to do for a while, so I'm glad that it's working out the way that it is.
Yeah.
Dr. Lisa, having never heard your story, never there is no exposure yet. I know the things you're passionate about, and I know a good chunk of your story anyway. But for context and, to help the listeners along too and to establish some credibility, why don't you give us kind of like I said, pre-recording the synopsis or the Reader's Digest version of your story so that we can get to talking about things that we want to talk about. How does that sound?
Well, from a young age, I knew I loved drugs and alcohol, and, I say that I was always using drugs until it became a problem, and then I started abusing them. I became an alcoholic, an opiate addict, and I ended my addiction using fentanyl. And what got me sober, I've already told Chuck this, I'll say this again, so, you can hear Dr. Lisa. I gave my son a Band-Aid one day, and he held the Band-Aid up to the light and flicked it so the Band-Aid would move down from the top before he opened the wrapper. And I'd already been thinking about getting sober, and that was like you need to change some stuff so your kids can have a better life.
So
how old was he?
3.
So for context and for somebody that might be listening and doesn't understand the significance of that moment, it's basically mimicking using a syringe, right? That's what happened there with that Band-Aid package, and I think I
Or
just
just
think
a
it's
bag,
important for people
when you
to,
get a bag of drugs, you flick it.
or that too,
Yeah.
yeah, that too, right? Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I
That's
mean,
what
in
we
either
were doing.
case,
None of us
right?
were using IV drugs.
Okay, so it was
We would,
flicking the bag like it
we'd
was a
get a
bag
bag
of
of
dope. Then.
fentanyl and you want it all down
Yeah,
in the bottom, so you flick it and
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
No kidding, no kidding. So definitely a turning
Can I
point for
ask
you.
a few questions?
Absolutely.
Of course you can.
That was like the most concise version of what I'm sure is a very long story. Good job.
Thanks.
But like, so you said that you were sort of always using, like, how old were you really when you started?
I was introduced to drugs and alcohol when I was 8, 9 years old. Um, they became a daily thing in my life around probably the age 13. With
Oh,
cigarettes and weed and, then drinking slowly came into play. And, I stopped, like I said, I was just using drugs. So, every single time I have 3 kids. Every single pregnancy that I had, I would stop drinking, stop, taking pills, stop doing coke, no ecstasy, none of that. Like I had clean pregnancies. It wasn't until I decided I wasn't having any more kids, which was after my son, that it absolutely consumed my life because I knew I wasn't going to have to stop again.
hmm
It's kind of a sad way to think about it, but it's how I thought
yeah.
about it.
Well, and like, because I mean, 8 years old is pretty little, right? What was kind of going on in your life that at the age of 8 you were, smoking weed, whatever?
My mom and my dad had split, and my mom moved elsewhere, and I was living with my dad. It was me and my brother, and he worked 2 jobs, and I have an older sister, and that's kind of when I was introduced to her, but she was
Mm.
older. So while the cat's away, the mice will play. So my sister just did whatever she wanted,
hmm
and her friends thought it was fun to, pass the blunt to us or give us shots.
Yeah.
So
And was there a family history of addiction, or was it more just that sort of not having great, parental presence, kind of knowing what you're up to?
yeah, I think it was that, like, I wasn't really exposed to I was exposed to drugs and alcohol growing up, but it was at this point it was, we'd go camping every weekend, and on the weekends, the adults would drink. Now I hear stories. My parents used to buy me Barbie toys so they could use them to make like makeshift pipes and stuff like that. I didn't know that at the time.
hmm
We had a basement too, and I remember like there'd be an adult at the top and people at the bottom, and they literally ran a pipe down the stairs so they could somebody like they were downstairs doing whatever they were doing, and whoever was watching the kids could still partake. And they literally were like lighting a bong at the bottom,
Mm.
and they'd hit it up the stairs and blow it wherever so they could still keep an eye on us. I
Wow.
wasn't really aware of this stuff as a kid, but now my mom does open up and tell me these stories.
hmm Like so resourceful.
Yeah.
It's like, how can we do what we want to do and still keep an eye on the kids, right? Like,
hmm
um,
Now
yeah.
that I'm older, I see more. Like, I came in contact with one of my cousins a few years back on my father's side, and he was a full-blown opiate addict. Um, but I think now, like, it's more my mom's side that has the addiction.
hmm
But at that point, I wasn't exposed to stuff like some kids are.
Yeah. But it's interesting, right? Because they're so like I've actually had parents ask me, like they'll bring their kid in who's in a psychotic state after doing drugs and they'll, say, well, how did this happen? And, or why is my kid using? And like I always tell people, we don't know. Like we don't know. There's not like one thing, but
Hmm
I always find it interesting to ask about that genetic factor. And in most cases, you can't fully weed it apart because, so if you have parents who are using substances, then there is potentially, what we would call a family history of substance use or abuse or addiction or whatever. But then also, when we have parents who are using substances, then the environment in which you grow up in genetics aside,
Yep.
is also impacted, right? Whether that's neglect, whether that's modeling, whether that's poor supervision. It's like and then often a lot of trauma too, right? But there's like so many layers to it.
Lisa, what did you mean when you
So
said
it is
modeling?
sort of, it's
What is that?
interesting. And like sorry, say again, Chuck?
What did you mean when you said modeling? Modeling?
So modeling is that, yeah, modeling as in, when you grow up in a household, the way your parents do things models how you should do them. And so if you grow up where your parents model fighting, then you're more likely to then have a partner and fight with them or to accept
Oh,
conflict
okay,
in a
okay,
relationship.
okay.
If you, yeah,
Okay,
does that make
makes sense.
sense?
I took it as the
And there's-
parents modeling something, but it would be you modeling their behavior. Is what that means, or am I interpreting that correctly then?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I always think of it the other way around, but I don't think it really matters. Like, to me, it's
No,
like
okay.
they model for their child how to live and how to react and how to do things. And then their
Gotcha.
child will
Okay.
then,
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense to me now. And I'm sorry
yeah,
if I was splitting
right?
hairs.
And
there,
so
it's
it
just-
is,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
that's okay. That's okay. But it's always interesting, right? Like, if you take, for example, in my brother's situation, my mother grew up in a very difficult childhood with alcoholic parents, but then subsequently was raised by her aunt from about the age of, I think, 11 or 12 years old because her home life was so challenging. And then because she'd grown up with abuse and alcoholic parents, I think she, like at my parents' wedding, she drank apple juice. Like she was just completely swung the other way. And so for us growing up, like my parents would drink like on occasions, but like even like I don't think there's anything wrong for some people if it works for you. If you want to have a glass of wine with a meal once in a while, go for it. Like my parents didn't do that. Like they didn't drink except for special occasions or if they were out at a Christmas party or that kind of thing. There was no weed, like they did not smoke weed. There was no drugs, but there's definitely a strong family history of addiction. And then, I have a brother who did not grow up with that being modeled in the home and then has faced addiction struggles. Now, there's a lot of, again, different factors you could add into that picture, but it is interesting, to just think about what kind of contributes in people's individual stories, right? And when I hear about an 8-year-old who is smoking weed, it's like, what's going on there? Like, how at 8 years old are you smoking weed, right?
And there was like other things, that happened before my parents split up. And it's funny that you bring up that modeling thing because when I first got sober and really dug into, why am I an addict? Why are some of these behaviors normal for me, even though I know they're not normal? We dug into my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
We really dug into my childhood and was like, okay, well, you think it's okay to sit around and do this with your friends because that's what you've seen growing up. And even though it's not normal or okay to do this, you were shown that. So it was a lot of breaking those habits and breaking those those cycles, which is another thing that makes me really grateful for, my son doing that and that helping me get sober because I did not want, I knew what I was dealing with from my childhood. I didn't want to pass that on to them. So it was something huge that I dug into was, how has my childhood, because it doesn't stem from right here.
Hey, Ashes to awesome listeners. The following PSA is brought to you by The Phoenix. The Phoenix is not just a gym. It's a community where the real weight lifted is not just barbells, but hearts, minds, and spirits. Whether you're in recovery or simply choose to live a sober lifestyle, The Phoenix offers a range of activities from yoga to hiking, all led by people who've walked a path of transformation. So why not aim higher with The Phoenix? The first membership requirement is just 48 hours of sobriety. Rise from the ashes today and soar with The Phoenix. Hey listeners, let's take a moment to talk about something crucial: carrying naloxone. This life-saving medication can reverse an opioid overdose in minutes. You might think, I don't need it, I'm not around opioids, but the truth is you'll never know when you'll be in a situation where you could save a life. It's easy to use, and many places offer it for free or at a low cost. So let's be prepared and look out for each other. Remember, you might not plan on being around opioid use, but you never know when it'll be around you, and you could save the life of somebody that is loved. This is Jared Blaine with the Blaklist podcast, and remember, you are loved.
It stems from 3, 4, 5 other things, and it plays a huge factor still in my life today. Understanding my kids and, modeling the right way, I think a lot about what I say to them and how I say things and how I handle their emotions. And, it's important. It's really important.
And I think, with the day hospital program that I work at, which is a more therapy-based program, I will spend hours with clients where we're talking about where they're at today, what symptoms they have today, what we can do about the symptoms today. And then I always do one session, and sometimes it's more, but I always make sure that I preserve one session to focus entirely on childhood. And I will ask them everything from, what their mom did during her pregnancy with them, to what their temperament was like as a child. Were you an internalizer? Were you a kid who blew up? Did you sort of sulk away and deal with sadness and anger by yourself, or did you share it with people? I'll ask them to describe. Tell me what your mom was like. Tell me what your dad was like. Tell me about how your mom and dad treated one another and how they, handled conflict. When you did things as a child, how did your parents react to you? If you were sad, if you made a mistake, what were their reactions to those things? And inevitably, I would say, I don't like to use the words never and always, but almost always, it's that one session takes all the other sessions and just goes, whoom, and it's aha, okay, now we've got it. And when I can then present it back to a patient and say, so what you're telling me or what I'm hearing, and tie it together, you can see light bulbs going off. And it's I've had people say to me, it all makes sense now. And they're probably some of my favorite moments with patients, because I think people, no matter your level of insight, we're always trying to understand ourselves. We're why am I doing this? Or why am I doing that? Or why do I react this way? And without guidance and education on that particular thing, most of us have no idea. And then when you can work with somebody who can help you put it together and suddenly things make sense to you, I just feel I see people, it's almost the weight of it gets lifted and things become clear.
I ran away from my therapist for 6 months the first time we made that breakthrough. We made that breakthrough, and we connected the dots in a session, and I did not see her for 6 months. I'm I don't know if I can do this.
Right.
So it can be really hard for some people, because, it's not you're saying that your parents were bad people.
No.
Not at all. They did what they did. They did what they knew, because it most likely stems from other people. But it's just, for me, it was, even though now, sitting at, my age, I can see, my parents and their faults and stuff like that. Going back to your childhood and picking that apart can be a lot.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's our nature to protect our parents, right? It doesn't matter how good or bad our parents are. I think inevitably children, no matter the age, want to protect their parents. And for that reason, I always preface those sessions with that exact conversation. Yeah. That nobody is good or bad, right? We are all 10 million shades of gray. And that I do believe everybody does the best they can with what they know. Yeah. And that includes us, and it includes our parents. And, just reassuring people that what we're trying to do is understand how the person in front of me. It's like how you've come to be who you are today. It's not about blaming, our parents. And I'll say to people, I could sit here with your mom and we could do this with your mom and understand why your mom did all the things she did. Like all of us do what we do for a good reason.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think it was validation too. Sorry, the fan. Look at me. The fan was
all
blowing
good.
in my face, and it made my eye burn. So I rubbed it, and I forgot I had mascara on. I think it was scary too to get that validation that it wasn't all my fault. It's not their fault, but I wasn't messed up like I thought. There were outside factors that contributed to it that I did not have control of. And I think that was, I think that's those 6 months I thought about it, and it was just getting that validation and accepting it and working through it. So
I find that super interesting because I bet you that happens for a lot of people, but I haven't had anybody describe it. And I find that really interesting because I think people often go through long periods of time or situations or whatever, and it becomes normal and comfortable to blame themselves, right? That's what they're comfortable with. It's like, I'm shit, I'm bad, it's all my fault. And even though for me as an outsider, I'm like, well, that sounds really terrible. Like that sounds like a terrible place to be. But if that's what you're comfortable doing, because it's what you've been doing, then the minute someone comes in and rocks that boat a little bit and leaves you going, okay, wait a minute, is this not all my fault? I could see how that would bring up like just lots of emotions and even be scary because it's not familiar anymore.
And that was the other thing too. Like I had to fight. I was in my rehab meeting with my counselor. They had to fight with me to go see a therapist and tell me that I have control problems. I like to be in control. I'm well aware of that. That is something that I've learned. And they told me, you are in control of the conversations. You are not going to be talking about anything that you don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
So she was asking those leading questions and that stuff came up and I was just like, whoa, no, like not something I want to talk about, but I needed it, and it took a while to realize, especially because like I don't really have a relationship with my father. I do forgive him and he is where he is. And I would not have gotten to that point if I didn't work through my childhood and realize that those were also learned behaviors for him.
Yes. No doubt.
That's what it took for me to forgive him and just realize that it's not going to be any different. So.
And, when just with even the little that you've shared with us, it's like anyone can imagine this. Like if you're a little kid and you don't have a lot of parental supervision, a kid may not recognize that in the moment, but that's scary to a child, right? Children want certainty, they want security, and they want predictability. And so when you don't have a lot of parental supervision, a kid doesn't have those things. So they try to compensate by being in control, as much as a child can be. But so it's not really a surprise that then you grow up to be somebody who wants to be in control. Because as a kid, that was probably what you did to make yourself feel safe in the world.
You want to hear another whammy?
Yeah.
I only lived with my father for a couple months after the split up. Then I moved in with my mom and did not see my father again until I was 14.
Wow.
So that was just such a short period. But like you said, it had such an impact on who I am today, even though it was just a couple months.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find something to wipe my tears with. And I can't find anything.
And I feel bad because I feel like we're not really responding. Like I'm like, is it a fan blowing in your face? Are you emotional?
No, it was a minute ago.
Video.
It was the fan.
Okay.
If you wipe them up, Brianna, it's sweat. That's how that works, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, so just go like this.
Oh,
Okay, I'm sweating. I'm just sweating,
Yes,
guys.
yes. See, I'm not crying. You're crying, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So,
But yeah, it was, like my dad is raising my sisters, did raise my sisters, is there for their kids. And I can't sit here and live with that anger that I didn't get that.
mm-hmm.
It's not going to change it.
you're allowed to feel it, though.
That's
You're
just
allowed to
it,
feel
right?
that.
The only thing,
100%. Right? And
totally.
And to have that
Yeah.
validated too, I think, Brianna, is important, right? But and I hope that you do get that from, if not from yourself, from your partner or from whoever else. But you need to validate that anger because you're allowed to feel that.
And right? I had an amazing stepfather. The man that my mom ended up marrying
side, right?
was amazing.
And that's
old
awesome.
School
right?
Italian taught us a lot.
Yeah.
And I try to have a relationship with him, but because his relationship with my mom ended so badly, he does not want a relationship with me. So there's another hurt.
And do you have other siblings that are same mom and dad?
Yes, my brother.
Okay, but not your sisters.
Yeah, not my sisters. They're just dad, different mom.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And my brother grew up in the same environment, and this guy has never smoked cigarettes. He's a casual drinker, like he'll pair his drinks with his food.
Mm-hmm.
Like he'll drink a nice IPA with his dinner, or he'll make, drinks at home. So, that's something else, that I try to help him with, and he understands.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, it's weird, looking at that dynamic that we both grew up in the same household, same environment, and two totally different lives.
Yeah. But again, you grow up. If you put two people in a room and do something to them, and then take them into separate rooms and ask them to tell you what just happened, the stories will never be the same.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so it's like our perspective on something is always unique. And because I agree, I feel like I see that a lot. I live that too, is you grow up in the same house with the same parents, but everybody individually still has a lot of unique experiences, and those experiences create different lenses through which we experience everything else in our life. And so, people definitely have unique reactions to the same situation.
Yeah. And that's another thing I learned, I thought it was just, trauma that I went through and stuff like that. I've always been an emotional person.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been expressive with my emotions and explosive with my emotions since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And that's been something that I worked long and hard to help me process that internally instead of externally on everybody else around me. Taking accountability for how I react, because I don't have to pass that on to my kids.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And what you're describing is temperament, right? And we're born with our temperament. We're not born with our personalities. Our personalities evolve as a function of modeling and experiences, but we're born with temperament. And different temperaments are going to be predisposed to the evolution of different personality traits based on experiences. And so temperament's a really important thing to understand about a person, because it says a lot about how they can evolve, right? But I have a little girl who's similar, right? I mean, she came out of the womb screaming, and she's been screaming ever since. She's a it's true though, isn't it?
It really is.
She's bold and she's feisty, and yeah.
The only experience I've had with your daughter, Dr. Lisa, is that picture with her and Chuck on Messenger.
Oh yeah. It says a lot, right?
Yeah.
But again, she has that temperament, and if you have a psychologically minded parent, and you don't need to be a therapist or a psychiatrist, you just need to be psychologically minded. But when somebody has strong emotions, a huge important thing raising those people is validating their feelings. Because people who are outward with their emotions, if they don't feel heard, they'll turn the volume up for you. They're like, no, I'm upset and you don't get it. So let me get more upset.
Yep.
And, so it's really important. And the problem is that particularly, I think you see this even more so generationally as you go back.
Tries.
Anyway.
But curiously, Brianna, again, when you were a little kid and you would have big emotions, did you get validated? Did you have people stop and say, I can see you're upset, or I can see
No.
you're really mad?
No.
What's that like for you?
My mom was one of those kids are to be seen and not heard. Now, here's where the flip side is. Even though, I wasn't raised around my dad, and now today I see the environment that my sisters were raised in, and I am appreciative for the environment that I was raised in. My dad lets kids be kids. He sits down and he'll talk to them and stuff like that. So, I was raised in
Brianna.
Kids are to be seen, not heard.
A big parallel to that. Very different. My little brother is 12 years our junior to my twin brother and I. So we're raised in very, very different households, right? My mom, remarried my stepdad, who's just this incredible guy, when we were like 6. And so by the time, Levi came around, it was another 6 years after that. And he was just raised in a totally different environment than we were. And I'll never speak ill of mom and all those things, but just, it was a very different place. My brother and I were both chip on our shoulders kids for whatever reason. And I don't know, that's not something I've ever really delved into. But I remember looking at him, and at times, and I'm sure you felt this, Brianna, at times being a little resentful at that, but having to bring myself to check in and go, I'm so happy that he doesn't have that chip on his shoulder, the way I did.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm just to bring yourself to a place where you can just be happy for them without harboring resentments about it. It can be tough to do because we're fucking human.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so can you relate to that experience? And I'm sure you can. You kind of just describe it.
Going, working through my childhood and with a therapist and stuff like that, and realizing that, it is what it is, and, accepting things for how they happened. But I am grateful for my sisters. They still, there's still issues in the house, but they were allowed to be kids and express their emotions and work through things, and I'm happy for them for that. I have a great relationship with my sisters, even though we didn't grow up around each other. Even my brother, it's weird because we were raised in the, kids are to be seen and not heard. The kids, when we go to my brother's house, run around the house, do whatever you want, be as loud as you want, and I let my kids do that too. Because I don't want them to have that.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing. I think we always try to just do a little bit better than what was, what we experienced. We're not perfect.
No, right.
We screw up all the time. But what day was it?
Your 40 years ago, right? And your parents have grown in that 40 years too, right? They're, what I mean? So of course they're going to be different with their grandkids, and they're, you don't think. If my mother didn't question her parenting at some point during the shit show that my twin brother and I both, in our own ways, have and we've both been complete shit shows. If she didn't question her parenting at some point in there, she wouldn't be a human being. Right? She just wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Right? So you're going to learn from that experience.
It's rare.
Too,
I feel like I've seen.
Go ahead. Yep.
I've seen really narcissistic people who don't question their parenting because they are so narcissistic. that there's
Yeah.
like, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. All these problems are them, not me. But it's rare.
Yes.
I think most people do question their parenting. One thing, though, is I think in our parents' generation, even though I'm sure they questioned it, I don't think they were vocal about it. And I think even today, a lot of people aren't. But I think that sharing that we recognize we've made mistakes, sharing that we don't have it all figured out is really powerful for kids, you know? A
Oh,
few days
yeah.
ago, I got super upset with my daughter and yelled at her. And, you know, after I calmed myself down, I went and I apologized to her. I mean, again, like, I don't think in our parents' generation, how often do our parents apologize to us? You know, I had
It's like,
good
you think
parents. I
mathematically you
don't
were
remember a
wrong
lot of
once.
that.
Like,
Like,
it had to have happened once where you were wrong, right? Mathematically over the course of like 15 years, right? No. No, you were right every single time.
yep,
Right? You would think
yep.
that was impossible, but yeah, here we are, right?
But, you know, but it's like but apologizing, like apologize to your kids. Like if you screw up, apologize. Just like when they screw up, we want them to apologize. And like I went and I said, I'm sorry I yelled at you. And she said to me, she said, it's okay, Mom. And I said, it's not actually okay. Like, hopefully you forgive me, but it's not okay for me to yell at you like that. And so I have to work on that, you know? And I think being transparent, being transparently human with our kids is a huge gift. Um,
Yeah.
because it's like show them that you make mistakes, share vulnerability, take accountability, and all of that kind of comes with a simple, transparent conversation when we screw up as parents. And there's a lot of modeling in that for our children, right?
I ended up taking, this is how deep I dived into everything. I took a parenting class so I could help, you know, myself with my kids, you know, because I did it wrong for so many years, you know, and that was part of my healing from my addiction. And I got validation from that parenting class, you know, that I was doing stuff right. And I got some tips on how to do some things better.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
some of us learn on our own and some of us need a little help.
yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we
At the
probably
end of the
all
day,
need a
so
little
long as
help.
you're not
But
letting them listen to Taylor, listen. At the end of the day, as long as you not let your kids listen to Taylor Swift, you're raising good kids, right? Because that's what good parenting is all about.
That was Jared
I had
bringing
to
me
say
my
it.
coffee.
I had to say it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry.
I don't know if
I'm
Brianna
sorry.
gets the context of that, but you know,
I do, and I ignored it.
okay. Yeah.
And see, so Chuck, it's funny, you know, like you say, you know, like, you know, your mom is raising your brother different. I want my kids
Was
to have
raising like he's a
grandparents,
grown ass man now.
because
by the way,
mine.
right? But yeah.
Oh, okay. Anyway, I didn't really have my grandparents. They passed away at a young age for me.
Mhm.
So I want my kids to have that.
Yeah.
But my mom is still, even with the grandkids, you were to be seen and not heard.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
So I do
That is.
limit those interactions, you know.
Yeah.
And my son is a boy. He's really rambunctious. He's loud. You have to keep him busy. So, like my daughters can spend the night at my mom's house. My son can't.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I will not leave my son alone with my mom because I have control issues. But I also don't want, I don't want those same things to happen to him.
Of course you don't.
And like one thing I would challenge you to do is that when you tell yourself you have control issues, add on in your mind for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's there for a reason.
Oh, yeah.
There's a reason. You're not like faulty. There's a reason
Or
that
maybe
you
a
do what
little.
you do,
Maybe.
right?
Thanks, Chuck.
Can't help it.
I know. And I do think, this is going to be like unique to every parent. And also I think it depends a bit on the child's age. But I think also like things like having open conversations about the fact that, you know what, like grandma's not perfect. And there's some things grandma does that, are different than the way we do them at home. And it's just, that's just kind of the way grandma is.
Yeah.
Can also help kids be around the grandparents, and because they're going to notice, like if they go to their grandparents' house and like grandma behaves very differently than you, or grandma gets mad about things you don't get mad about, they notice it. So again, it's like just just have an open conversation. Because like pretending they're not going to notice is we're all kidding ourselves. Like they notice a lot more than we give them credit for.
And I think the
So,
way I explain it to them, because it's normal for, other environments, is there's different rules at different houses.
yeah.
This
Yep.
person, this is their rules when we go to their house. This is this person's rules when we go to their house. And, he listens to it, but his impulses get the best of
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
because he does
So,
live in a safe home. It's
right.
hard to shut that off for a little bit.
And so you said you have 3 kids, is that right?
Mhm.
Yeah. And during your time of using, were they ever taken from you or are they always with you?
I always had them.
Okay. And
I lucked out. I've gotten my 2 strikes, and I will never mess up again.
mm.
I
But what was that like trying to, because I just think like I only have 1 kid and like I find it challenging a lot of the times. And that's with a clear head. Like what was that like for you parenting 3 kids while dealing with all those other things?
I don't know. I was so high that I just tuned everything out.
Mm.
I was there, but I wasn't there. There was a lot of
Yeah.
yelling, a lot of me not like really interacting with them, and it just, go be a kid. I'll feed you. I'll make sure you're clean. But beyond that, like we'd go out and do fun stuff. Like I didn't say, I wasn't, we stayed in the house all the time, but I was always so high or drunk that I don't think I really parented them.
Yeah.
I was just an adult in the house to make sure they were alive.
Mm. And then what were their ages when you got sober?
I've been sober for 4 years, and I have a 13, so she was 9, 6, and 3.
9, 6, and 3. Okay. And then like when you got sober, what was that like for the kids? Like particularly your older kids? Like did they ask questions? Did they talk about, what it was like for them when you were using or?
No, I think they just pointed out, that I was different.
Mm.
Mom, and this still, I'll probably cry when I say this, but they'd be like, Mama, you're being nice.
Mm.
And they don't say that anymore because I'm nice now, but
Mm-hmm.
it was a lot of, Mommy, you're being nice. Mommy,
Yeah.
you're being nice.
Mm-hmm.
So, and even though that hurt, that reminded me that I was doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So, and we
And
are,
hopefully reminded you that you're a good person,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
the real you is nice.
Me and Jared, so I could stop crying. His kids, dealt with him being an addict too. So we're actually going to this summer, and I'm working with a couple other people that have kids, but they're going to sit down with us first before they allow us to sit with their kids. But, we sat down with somebody recently that struggles with mental health, like strong, he's had a couple attempts of taking his life. And his daughter's 11, and I asked him, I'm like, have you ever sat down with her and talked to her about like what she understands about you or mental health in general? He goes, she's 11. She doesn't deal with that.
Hmm. Yeah, right.
I wasn't arguing with him. It just made me think, me and Jared this summer, we're going to start with our kids sitting on the couch, and we're going to set a camera up, and we're going to ask them, because they do struggle with mental health.
Mm-hmm.
They do have daily struggles that they deal with. What do you understand about mental health, and what do you understand about addiction? So we can bring that awareness to that our kids know.
Oh, yeah.
They know. So, I had an 11-year-old girl over at my house the other day, and my daughter had reacted to her brother, and the little girl goes, that was her fight or flight. And I look at her and I'm like, but that validated too, so we're going to start sitting down with, children, obviously with their parents' permission, um, to see what they do understand.
Yeah.
So we can let parents know, like, they know what's going on, and they notice that difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an oversimplified statement to come out of my mouth, but anybody watching this who thinks their kids don't know, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
they
absolutely.
know.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how prudish your household may be, because they go to school and they
Hmm.
talk to other kids. And I am not so to become a child and adolescent psychiatrist, you do like a 6th year of residency in a fellowship program. So I have not done that. During like a regular psychiatry residency program, we do have to do child and adolescent training. So I've, done psychiatric work at the Children's Hospital in Calgary. I have spent time on the child psychiatry unit at the Children's Hospital. These are like little kids. And then I've also spent time on the adolescent unit at the Foothills Hospital. Um, Kids know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're sticking your head in the sand, then you need to pull it out.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
And see, that's something, like he explained, like his wife doesn't deal with it that much. And, he'll be dealing with his issues and he won't see his daughter for the weekend. And sometimes he'll go months without seeing her. And that's why I asked him that question. Have you ever spoken to her to see what she understands? Like, he was all over the news. He was a cop. He was locked inside his house with all his guns. Like, he went through a huge thing when she was old. This was just 2 years ago, so she was 9. And if he really thinks, I let him, okay, I wasn't going to argue with him. But it did make me realize that there needs to be more of an awareness brought.
And two, like when kids don't know, they will create a narrative,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you think that just being secretive or, not talking about it is doing your kid a favor, they have wild imaginations and they will fill in
They
the
do.
gaps with whatever narrative they want. And to be honest, a lot of times the narrative is worse than the reality. And so, I do agree that things need to be done in a manner that is suitable based on a child's age.
Absolutely.
I don't think you divulge all the dirty details to a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, starting with the what do you know about this, or what do you think is going on, or whatever, and then helping them fill in the gaps so that they don't allow their imagination to do it for them.
Yeah. And that's,
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you there. Everything is age appropriate, but you still can explain it to a child at any age,
Yep.
when they're dealing with, what did you call it before? What are we born with?
Temperaments.
Temperaments.
Yep.
We can explain those temperaments to our kids and help them work through them and process them as
Yep.
a child as opposed to an adult.
Yep.
And I think that's so important.
Yeah, and I think, it's funny because we're an addictions podcast and we're actually talking a lot about like just personalities and temperaments and, stuff like that. But it's so important because, especially you take people who have, well, actually, I wouldn't even say that. If you have that more explosive temperament, and you're not getting the validation you need, then kids don't have good coping skills, right? They need to be taught coping skills. So if they're not taught coping skills, um, and then they're exposed to substances that takes the edge off this explosiveness or kind of dampens it or whatever it might be for them, they're going to be more likely to enjoy that feeling.
Yeah.
Similarly, if you have a kid who's an internalizer, they're quiet, they suppress it, they squish it down. That stuff all builds up internally. So again, when they find substances, it's also a release. So I do think there's like such a like it can all be drawn together. Does this mean that every kid with either of these extreme temperament styles is going to go on and struggle with addiction? No.
Yeah.
But I think that it's just another thing that what can we be doing for our children so that they don't seek out or enjoy the coping that comes with drugs, right? And it's
Especially
like,
you said, with sorry, go ahead.
But it's just yet to make sure like that they're seen and that they're heard and that we have these conversations and we have open dialogue and we validate them. Um, it's just another thing as a parent that you can do with a young child or with a child of any age that I think decreases the likelihood that drugs are going to be what they're looking for.
And I don't even think like on the path of drugs, like it helps them be open with you. You know,
Yeah.
if we're having these conversations with our kids at such a young age, and we can have a back and forth, understanding age appropriate conversation with our
Mhm.
children, if they do start struggling, you know, they'll be more inclined to speak to either a parent or a
Mhm.
friend or another adult because they feel safe,
Mhm.
you know. So
Agreed.
it's
I don't know if did I can't remember now if this came up a few weeks ago in the podcast somehow. But it was something
mm,
that I saw posted on Instagram. I can't remember by who. And I just thought it was such a brilliant idea. Like my little one is almost at the age where I could do it. Like she's starting to write a little bit, but certainly if you've got like kids who can write and spell and whatever, is that you get a notebook and this notebook is for one purpose. And so if there is something they want to tell you or ask you or whatever, they write it in this notebook and they put it under your pillow. And the agreement is that as the parent, you will never bring up the topics in that notebook verbally, but you will write them back in the notebook, you know, based on whether they're asking you a question or they're sharing something with you, like you will write them back and you will put it under their pillow. And it's just this very safe space where they can tell you or ask you anything and know that unless they choose to bring it up in face-to-face verbal conversation, that you will not, which will probably be very difficult, right? There might be certain things that go into that notebook that are you're just like, oh, how do I
yeah.
not have a conversation? Um, but I just thought like just another super simple, cheap thing that as a parent we can do to just make sure that they know there's always a way they can tell us things and that we're not going to react or, you know, whatever it might be.
I think I'll start that with my daughter today.
Does that sound? Yeah, like
She
I'm
does
like,
sometimes, like she'll leave me little notes, you know, like before she goes to school, she'll leave me a little note on the end table. And then she'll just ask after school if I've seen it. And I'm like, yeah, do you want to talk about it? And she's like, no. I'm like, okay,
yeah,
you know, I
yeah,
read it,
yeah.
you know,
And
I think
so
that goes,
hard to not, you know, create
mm-hmm,
conversation when they don't want to, but I think it is so important, right? Like, I might have to leave the house sometimes to avoid engaging in that conversation, like, because I think it would be hard, but I think it's just such a cool idea.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is a really neat idea.
Mhm.
And it helps us understand our kids' thoughts too, you know, and how they're processing stuff.
Mhm.
And like you said, you know, like we're not going to talk about what they wrote, but then we can understand ourselves more too,
Mhm.
because we aren't being reactive. We have to, you know,
Yeah,
compose our thoughts before
totally.
we respond, you know, and that helps with adults too, you know,
Mhm.
responding to other adults and, you know, in
No
situations
kidding.
everywhere.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's a help for everyone.
Ladies, we've come up on an hour here rather quickly, which is it's unfortunate
Yeah.
because there's so much more to talk about. We never even come close to talking about the things that we had planned on, and that's fine because I think this episode is just as, if not more, valuable. Right? I think that there's a lot to be learned from this episode, and a lot of people can take from it. So, with that said, Brianna, I'll start with you, and then we'll move on to Lisa with this. I got just one more question each for you guys. Brianna, if you're talking to the mother or a mother who is suffering an addiction, and guilt and shame are what they are, right? They're guilt and shame. What do you say to that person as they consider getting into recovery or in early recovery about all the things that they must be feeling in the moment?
Say the same thing I'll always say. No matter how many bridges you've burnt, that bridge to recovery is always there. and it is filled with love and acceptance on the other side. No matter what you're feeling or what you're going through, there is somebody on the other side that will understand you and will validate you. Your feelings are valid. That's what I tell people all the time. Your feelings are valid. Nobody else has to understand them, but they're valid.
It's beautiful. Somebody once said to me a long time ago, you are entitled to every single emotion you have. And I think about that often, and I actually, just randomly kind of off topic, threw that line back at her 20 years later, a couple months ago. She had posted, we hadn't talked in probably 15 years, and she had posted something, she's having a really hard time, and I said, somebody once said to me, I was able to just throw her own line back at her. But Lisa, the same question goes to you. What would you say through your lens?
Yeah, so to a parent who is struggling with addiction and feeling a lot of shame about how it's impacted their parenting.
Yeah, or early recovery, same thing really, right?
One thing I love to say to parents in general is, what would you say if this was your daughter? How would you speak to your daughter if she found herself in this situation 20 years from now? And then you go look yourself in the mirror and you say that thing to you. Because as a parent, you would not look at your child ever at any age and wish for them to shame themselves or hate themselves. Mm-hmm. And so it's, what would you say to your best friend if you don't have kids, or what would you say to your child if they were in this situation as an adult one day? And then show yourself the same grace and the same kindness.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's important.
Absolutely love that. Well, that does bring us to my favorite part of the show. As we know, that's the daily gratitudes. So let's start with you, Brianna. What you got for some daily gratitudes?
With this conversation, I am grateful for my kids and their enthusiasm for their lives every day.
It's wonderful.
So, yep.
Lisa, what you got for us today?
Yeah, I think it's on my mind now because we talked about it, but I'm grateful to have a little human being who sees me through a bright light, even at my worst, who will forgive me when I screw up. And yeah, Alexis is like the joy of my life, I always wanted to be a mom. I became a mom much later in life. I did not have an easy time becoming a mom. And so I'm just grateful for her today.
Oh, that's beautiful. For myself, it's, it's today's you, Brianna, for showing up at last minute, and not just showing up, but having a hell of a conversation, right? Just like a really fantastic conversation. You can tell I think it's a great one if I'm not talking much, right? And I just to sit here and listen to you two moms talk, and through your different lenses, and it's just been a beautiful talk, and I'm really glad that you were able to show up and help us out with that. So thank you very much. Right?
Yeah. Like you said, it wasn't a conversation we planned, but it happened.
yeah, right. I'm also very grateful to every single person who continues to like, watch, listen, comment, share, subscribe, hit all the buttons down at the bottom. Every time you do any one of these things, you are getting me a little bit closer to living my best life, and that is to continue making a humble living, spreading the message. The message is this: if you're in active addiction right now, today could be that day. Today could be the day that you start a lifelong journey. Reach out to a friend, reach out to a family member, call into detox, go to a meeting, go to church, pray. I don't care. Do whatever it is you need to do to get that journey started, because it is so much better than the alternative. And if you have a loved one who's suffering an addiction right now, just taking the time to listen to this enlightening conversation. Can you just take one more minute out of your day and text that person, let them know they're loved? Use the words.
You are loved.
That little glimmer of hope just might be the thing that brings them back. Very good job, ladies. Very, very good job.
I was looking for a button to end it, but I'm not ending
it. My body's getting cold. My life is running low. Feel me fall. okay. I'll find you another day, and I'm not scared to go. It will be okay. I'll find you another way, and I'm not scared to go, because when I die, I'll be happier in another life. I'll be a ladybug soaring through the sky. Please search for me, please find me. So please don't cry when I land on your arms, spread my wings and fly. So please don't cry. Spread my wings and fly. So please don't cry.